The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Case IQ, a global provider of whistleblowing case management and compliance solutions. Learn more at caseiq.com. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics in Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from North Carolina is Nick Gallo. Nick is Chief Servant and Co-CEO of Ethico. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting article he and his brother wrote for Compliance and Ethics Professional magazine, in which they discussed what they call the control paradox. Nick, can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, really glad to be here. Sometimes compliance rules that are designed to prevent misconduct can sometimes encourage that misconduct inadvertently through, compensating behavior theory or risk homeostasis. So this is kind of like the concept of how seatbelts can sometimes lead some drivers to drive more aggressively, obviously offsetting the safety benefits that seatbelts are meant to afford.
That's a great analogy. So what leads to this phenomenon?
Well, I think it's a natural, our natural sort of posture is to try to fix things. And we fix things through communication, we fix it through controls, we fix it through policies, we fix it through education. So I think it's a natural, it's a natural entailment of, our role and our positions. But I think if it takes, if our faith is in the controls, and we put too much faith in those controls by themselves, and we don't have, the principles behind those controls conveyed, along with those controls, sometimes people can kind of overly rely on those, and it can kind of create this false sense of security. And I just think this security leads to more casual decision making in critical moments, or it can, again, if we don't have those principles embedded.
Humorously, you're reminding me of the Jurassic Park movies and the idea that we had so many controls in place on the dinosaurs, nothing could go wrong, but of course, everything does. So what controls should we be putting in place to prevent the paradox?
I wouldn't say it's so much this is not a damnation of controls by any means. I mean, businesses are built on controls. They are absolutely critical. But I just think we need to think about the battleground is not our sort of control apparatus. Our battleground for ethical behavior is really in that split-second decision making. It's not the rule book. It's how people are going to actually act in those times. So we talked about in the article a couple of different things, and I've been on this tip lately that for the next 10 years to look a lot different than the last 10 years, we have to start bringing different mindsets, different frameworks, different approaches to our job, or it's just going to be more of the same. It's just going to be more status quo. It's, this moniker or this sort of stereotype that compliance has as the anti-business department, that's going to persist. So I think in order to break it, we just have to kind of think about these things a little bit differently. And, a really important battleground for us is that middle manager layer. So again, when we're rolling something out, if it's a new policy, really trying to talk about the why behind the what, and trying to maybe enable middle managers with some talk tracks or some insights into, the reason the control was put in place, or the reason the new policy was put in place, and then perhaps some storytelling around, other organizations that maybe, fell into trouble due to the lack of the thing that you're putting into place. Again, I think when we can equip people, particularly middle managers, with the why behind the what, it's a lot easier to get the authentic buy-in that is required for, compliance to actually occur.
You make a really good point there. We tend to focus a lot on what we need to tell people, but not as much as we probably should on why it's important and why they should be caring about it. And hopefully by focusing on that, we can get a greater sense of ownership. Now, if we talk about controls, we need to talk about auditing and monitoring them. How can we do that to make sure that they're effective?
Well, I mean, we have our basic, internal audit, or just kind of, ad hoc, auditing that, we can do. We put a control in place. We have to bring that sort of scientific mind to it to say, okay, well, this control should generate sort of this kind of behavior. So going back and checking and making sure, obviously, that those behaviors are occurring, that's great. But again, I think when we can start to incorporate some of this new thinking, or what I call kind of like next era, or this new era thinking, and we can understand the psychology behind the behaviors of the people in our organization, it can sometimes cause us to look at a control through a new lens. So the example we gave in the article is like a trader becoming less diligent in trade execution, for example, because there are these sort of system controls in place. So where are some other instances of that? Where are some other instances where the control might not actually be totally perfect, where we might be like overly relying, or again looking at where we might have some over reliance, or where a false sense of security in a control could be, and really kind of thinking through how somebody who's kind of on autopilot might kind of outsource their ethical decision making to that control. At the end of the day, I think the best control is true ethical behavior, because we can never articulate every single we can't articulate every potentiality for our business, or our rule books turn into our codes turn into phone books. So that's where I would start. I would look at where are our biggest risks, kind of taking that Pareto approach. Where are our biggest risks, and like where might someone kind of overly rely and sort of outsource that ethical decision making to the control in place.
You raise a really good point there, that the control should be acting as a control, not as sort of a test for the workforce, them thinking, well, we'll see if it goes through. If it goes through, then it must be okay.
To that exact point, I think also, like, if we're rolling out a control, we should know what the limitations of that control are, and that should be conveyed as well. Because very few things are perfect, you know what I mean? So like if we're rolling out a new policy, or we're rolling out a new fix to a process, or we're rolling out a new control, talking about like why we're doing it, what is it we're trying to do, and also like what are the limitations of it, that can help tip people off, again, when they have that sort of foundation of that kind of principle that drove this change. That can help them kind of fill in the gaps in situations that maybe haven't been accounted for, or that haven't been sort of discussed in the rollout.
So in the end, what's the best way to avoid the control paradox?
Well, I don't know if you can avoid it. Like, I don't know. I mean, if I'm driving in, I don't know, like if you feel safer, you are going, I'm getting back to the seatbelt thing, that's always going to be something that like we're fighting against. So I don't know if we can actually avoid it. I think we can maybe minimize the impact of it by just being aware of it and starting to ask those questions, kind of, again, doing that sort of like simulation thinking to see, where might this control paradox like sort of like rear its ugly head, in one area over another. But until everyone's like hardwired automatons with, Neuralinks, dialed in, connected to our risk management apparatus, I think that this is just a human thing. This is a human thing that like we just have to account for. Because again, at the end of the day, we're not managing companies of automatons. We're managing companies of human beings. Human beings are complex, and it's just something that I think we have to account for. But again, when we open our eyes to it, you can kind of probably start to imagine where some of these paradoxes might exist in your current program, and you can start to, again, if something's in place, I think the way to avoid it is through education, through communication, through kind of conveyance of those principles. You probably have a ton of controls in place in your organization. None of those are likely perfect. So again, talking about the limitations of those controls tied back to that principle can help kind of extinguish the control paradox to some degree.
To some degree is a good qualifier, because I do think people are perfect when it comes to the ability to see rules and controls and try their best to figure out ways to get around them.
Yeah, and I think an effective compliance program, or the most effective ones that I come in contact with, they really kind of cultivate this culture of right doing, not just preventing wrongdoing. And I think that kind of positive inclination can really help us look at our problems or look at the behaviors that we're trying to influence in a bit of a different way. Like we're not saying, hey, eliminate controls. Just, there was that famous book that came out. Well, it's famous in my mind. It's called The No Rules Rules. And it's about Netflix and how their whole code of conduct you could, essentially write on a Post-it note. And, it's kind of something like, do the right thing. And the guiding principle was like, anything you do, you should be able to sort of, explain how that is in the best interest of the company. That's an extremely simplified guiding principle. But I think in that book, they did a nice job, or, the guy who founded the company wrote it. So there might be a little self-serving-ness in there. But again, starting with that really clear principle allows for the actual rules that sort of stem from that principle can make a lot more sense. I came from the accounting world, and in accounting, it's all about kind of principles. Like, accounting is all principle based. So you might not need to, you might not know every single like nuance of the tax code or every single, code that, or every single rule of, within GAAP, but all those rules are extensions of these, basic underlying principles. So you can get pretty close, or you can get, pretty high odds of like, assuming what the right answer is when you have a true understanding of those underlying principles. So I just think, we're never going to eliminate controls, but if we can be really principle based, and we can be very clear about what those principles are and ensure that the rules are sort of, extensions of those principles, that does a lot to kind of stack the deck in our favor.
I agree. Principles are often a lot easier to understand than complex rules. And also it helps push out a sense of ownership to people, which is a positive thing as well. Well, Nick, thank you. And thank Gio for co-authoring with you the article. I want to thank you also for taking the time to talk to us today. Finally, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turteltaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.